Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo.
Amateur Traveler, episode 702. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about beaches and markets and mosques, colorful fishing boats, monkeys, and crocodiles as we go to West Africa, to Senegal and the Gambia. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Now let's talk about West Africa. I'd like to welcome to the show Brian Asher from theworldhiker.com, who's come to talk to us about Senegal and the Gambia in West Africa. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I know you were surprised that we had not previously done an episode of Amateur Traveler on this region. And as we were talking about before we started recording, we don't get as many pitches, but also there aren't as many travelers who tend to go to West Africa. East Africa, Southern Africa tend to get a little more tourists. In general, why should someone go to that region before we focus in on Senegal and the Gambia?
I think West Africa is really vibrant. Several of my friends who have been there for years in the Peace Corps say that it's about the people, it's about the markets, it's about the color, it's about the way they treat you, just the life that's in the streets of West Africa. I think we hear of the animals or the safaris, maybe of East and Southern Africa, but West Africa is really the beating hearts of the continent, with some of the most populous countries and a fascinating region with lots of smaller countries grouped in that you can visit in the whole region there.
Well, and we've chosen to talk about Senegal and the Gambia, one, because you've been there recently, and we always try and focus in on some place that wasn't a 10 years ago trip. Mm-hmm. Although you've been to all the countries in Africa?
Yes, all 54. All 54 nations in Africa.
Hats off to you.
Thank you.
And people may be wondering why we're talking about the two of them. This is one of those very odd places where one country actually completely surrounds the other country.
Exactly. The Gambia is inside of Senegal. So the Gambia has no other neighbors. It has Senegal to the north, the east, the south, and the west is the ocean. So it's completely enveloped.
Excellent. And why should someone go to Senegal and the Gambia?
I think Senegal and the Gambia are a great introduction to Africa, and especially to West Africa. They're safe countries. They're countries that are kind of a soft introduction. They're not quite as hard-hitting as some of the other countries in West Africa. Very safe to visit. For me, the weather was very nice after coming from kind of more tropical and intense heat in the Sahara, for example, moving my way across. And the people are very friendly. There's lots of loud or kind of lively music in the streets that you can listen to all the time. And there was a decent number of Europeans between quite a large French population, and there's quite a few Lebanese that live there, especially in Dakar, in the capital of Senegal. And it's a very soft, welcoming place that would not intimidate. I think most people, when they think of Africa, that would be a great place to start.
And by contrast, then, what you're saying is there are some of their neighbors where there might be a little more, you might think twice about going because of poverty, terrorism, civil war, or disease. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are the only four reasons I can think of not to go to some of the areas over the last 10 years, at least, in Western Africa.
And I think the transportation as well, and kind of the infrastructure, which,
Sure.
having made my way by public transportation through a lot of West Africa, can be extremely slow. And the Senegal and Gambia are a little breath of fresh air to be able to get around quite a bit easier than a lot of the countries in the region.
Well, and I'm fascinated to hear about this area. I have technically been in Dakar, but really only in the airport, and they didn't let me off the plane, so I really know very little about the area. So what kind of itinerary would you recommend?
I think that Senegal would be the one that you'd want to spend more time in. Dakar has quite a bit to see. There's quite a few beaches right there outside of the city. I stayed in a neighborhood called Wakam, which is nicely placed next to the African Renaissance Monument, which is the largest statue in all of Africa that kind of looks down on the whole region there in Dakar. And you can take a couple of really nice day trips out from Dakar. So if you stayed there for 2, 3, 4 days, I think that would kind of be an ideal amount of time to spend there. Most people, like I, went to a place called Gorée Island, which is very famous for being one of the biggest places that had slaves that were coming out to the Americas. And you can learn a lot about the history there. Very easy to walk around. There's a ferry that goes every couple hours to get there. And it's a place that almost everyone that goes to Senegal visits during their first couple of days. So I'd say for Dakar, 2 to 3 days with the city and the surrounding area, and then a couple of days up to St. Louis, which is about 4 or 5 hours north by bus.
Okay.
And you could spend a day or two there.
Known for its famous St. Louis Arch.
Exactly.
No, not that St. Louis. Okay.
The other St. Louis.
Okay.
In Senegal. It takes a good 6 to 8 hours going by bus. You could take a private car if you wanted, or if you were on a tour to get down to the Gambia. So you have to assume that's going to take up half or 2/3 of a day. And then I'd be down in Banjul, and there's an area right below it where there's nice beaches and a monkey park and things for 2 to 3 days. So I think you could easily piece together somewhere between 8 and 10 days, which would be kind of a nice length of a visit between Senegal and the Gambia.
Excellent. So you started us in Dakar, and you mentioned going out to the island whose name I've already forgotten.
It's Gorée Island, Goree Island, which is one of the biggest kind of hubs for the slave trade. And they have ferries that go out every couple hours. And that's definitely kind of a must-do if you're in Dakar. I think almost anyone I've talked to has done that visit for half day or 2/3 of a day. And real easy to walk around. I think it's about 1 kilometer or 2 long, and lots of locals there with colorful art and kids playing soccer and slave museums that are there that you can visit as well.
And so I assume there's a fort there, which is where they kept the slaves locked up.
Yes.
Okay. And what else are we going to do the 2 or 3 days in Dakar? How are we going to spend that? You mentioned the monument.
Yeah, there's a couple of monuments there. The country is about 96% Muslim, and so there's several nice mosques to visit as well, and a lot of fishermen that go out. And I think West Africa, one of the images of the coastal areas are these colorful fishing boats that you can see, like dozens of guys sliding off into the water and then sliding back up with their catch from the day. And there's a lot of seafood that they bring in, so these real colorfully painted boats is one of the images that you'll see on the coast there in Dakar.
And they're fishing from the beach there then, rather than from... Okay. And is there a specific place you would go to see that?
There is a mosque called the Mosque of the Divinity, which had a bunch of these colorful boats right next to it. And it's right there in Dakar, about 5 or 10 minutes from where I was staying in the neighborhood of Wakam. And I stayed in an Airbnb. There's lots of Airbnb options there for budget travelers, and there's all different ranges of accommodation, but there are inexpensive options for those looking for them as well. And I stayed with a local man there and always like staying with local people to give you a little flavor of what it's like.
Well, and what I usually find when we're talking about traveling in lesser developed areas of Africa is that we're talking about not an inexpensive flight to get in, relatively expensive for the distance intra-country, intra-flights inside of Africa compared to Europe, for instance, or US, but then really cheap food and really cheap housing. Is that about right? Yeah,
that's true. And so that's the pros and cons that I always weigh between local transport and the flights. I think the flight between the Gambia and Dakar is 40 minutes, I want to say, but I just checked and it's still upwards of $140 to $180 for a 40-minute one-way flight.
That's not too bad for Africa standards, actually.
Yeah, it can be a lot worse. It can be a lot worse for West African flights, but the bus, I want to say, was about $18 that took me there. So You just have to pick and choose what's worth more, your time or your money.
Well, and that is going to be an individual choice. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Another thing a lot of people like to do is there's a pink lake. I think there's several of these in the world. There's one in Mexico and one in Australia, I believe. And there's one about an hour outside of Dakar that is another kind of one of the must-do things on the visit that would take you maybe about a half day. And so...
Huh. That is really, really pink.
Yeah, if you look at pictures online, there's one called Rainbow Mountain in Peru where I don't know how much Instagram or things put filters on it. And this one, depending on whose picture it is, it's pink. It was quite pink, but sometimes the pictures make it look even more amazingly pink. Depending on the season, it tends to be kind of lighter, darker shades of pink that has salt miners that are out there and kind of local people selling artwork and tourist items.
And so this is Lake Redba.
Yes, Lake Redba, Lac Rose, I think in French, or the Pink
sure.
Lake is what it can go by. And I would say Gorée Islands and the Pink Lake would be 2 half-day trips that would make sense to have with your day or so exploring around Dakar. So to make it 2 or 3 days for Dakar and its surroundings, you might say.
And for those who don't know why, and I had to look up why is it so pink, you mentioned salt. It's 40% salt in some areas, and there is algae that makes it pink. Interesting. Mm-hmm. And it also used to be the finishing point for the Dakar Rally.
For the Dakar Rally. Yeah, I was going to mention that too. I think they've switched the Dakar Rally to South America now, I want to say, but it used to be the finishing point.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes, in 2009 to 2019, they held the Dakar Rally in South America. And the problem was the security threats, not in Senegal, but in Mauritania.
In neighboring countries in Mauritania,
exactly.
I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anything else we want to talk about in Dakar that we should see?
For me, I was there 3 different times getting visas for other countries and getting a new American passport. Mm-hmm. I think of it as a great base. It's a fun city to walk around. The streets are sandy. You feel like you're always walking in the sand. You might want to carry old shoes or sandals or flip-flops because it feels like it's a combination between the beach and the Sahara kind of meeting together. There's just all these dirt streets everywhere. It's cheap to get around. There's local taxis taking you absolutely everywhere around town. They use the West African franc, so somewhere between $2 and $4 you can get around pretty much everywhere in town. And you feel safe. There's lots of live music. There's clubs. There's restaurants. There's seafoods. It's kind of a cool vibe. It's a cool place to be. There's fashion. There's kind of quite a bit going on, I would say. And it's by far the biggest city in Senegal. So it's the main hub for everything.
Well, and you mentioned markets being one of the things that you loved about West Africa. Is there a particular market in Dakar that we should check out?
Yeah, I went downtown in the city area, which is a little bit, I wouldn't say gritty, but it's not kind of the beach area where most people stay.
There's a Sombe Dione or something like that.
And that's probably, I didn't remember the name. It's usually I ask my host, where's the main market? And then hop in a local taxi to get down there and walk around. And markets are always the hub of life, and to try, whether it's a pineapple or coconut or street food, and see what people are selling. The outfits are really colorful, especially female travelers would enjoy. I had a friend that went there with a group of French teachers, and they ordered dresses and outfits to be made for them, for all the French teachers. And they love that, to be able to kind of like custom order these really colorful West African outfits. That's something that people could enjoy as well.
Excellent. Well, and we should say that Gorée Island, which you mentioned, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So
yes.
For those of us who collect those, that would be something to know. Excellent. Are we ready to move on then from Dakar and head north?
Yep, let's head north. Let's head north up to the colorful streets of Saint Louis, Senegal, which is about 4 or 5 hours north. And so you can make it up there in about half a day. I think one of the funnest things there is walking the streets and just seeing these colorful homes, colorfully decorated. I think Latin America, we picture places like maybe Guanajuato, Mexico or something with these really kind of stunning, colorful views. And that's what you could translate over to this West African version going up to St. Louis. And so they've got several photography museums there. The beach is close by. But I think the colonial streets is the thing that you're going to see on Instagram or Facebook that's going to stand out
and the colorful
when you're walking around.
Boats.
And the boats, the fishing boats. Yeah. And you'll see a lot of kind of the local men with the long flowing robes and kind of the caps on. And then the women who often are carrying things on top of their heads. You'll see transporting kind of their fruit and buckets of things on their heads a lot of times. So it's a beautiful place to visit, and very, very colorful. And there's a photography museum there that's called Murfo San Luis. There's a bridge with 100-year-old architecture there. There's a jazz festival that's in April or May, and I just missed it last year because I was there last April. And lots of live music that's there. And so it's kind of an artsy cultural hub. And also, I didn't get to go there, but there's a national park about 45 minutes outside where there's lots of bird life. And you can go see flamingos and things like that are in this Langue de Barbe, or the national park that's 45 minutes outside of St. Louis. That would be kind of like a side trip that you can do outside of the city.
And then I guess the city itself is a UNESCO World Heritage Site for the colonial architecture predominantly.
All right, so back to Dakar. Then from Dakar, you're going to have to get some form of transportation. So you could take that $150 35-minute flight, but know that the airport, which I went out of several times to get my passports and visas, is a good hour and 15 minutes outside of Dakar. So you have to factor that in if you're flying in and out. Slash the taxi Uber ride that you're getting. It's definitely a ways outside of the city. So I chose to take a bus, and they have buses that go daily that leave early in the morning. That, like I said, was I think about $18 or $20, and you go all the way down to the Gambia. And part of the trip is taking a ferry, because the Gambia is built basically on a huge inlet of water there. And so you take a ferry and you get to get off and experience the ferry going across as well before you make your way into Banjul, which is the capital of the Gambia. And that will take the majority of a day. You can get a private driver, take a flight, or take public transportation like I did to get yourself down.
Well, and in terms of what to expect if we did the route on the bus, are we talking the high-end bus or the chicken bus, first of all?
I thought it was pretty nice compared to a lot of buses I had taken in West Africa. So I thought it was doable. Wasn't all that bad. I believe I had air conditioning when I was on it, which is always nice.
Yeah.
But the weather over there was really comfortable. I was in 110, 120 degree weather in Mali, Burkina, Chad, Niger, and getting over to Senegal with the ocean breezes last April was really pleasant. So it wasn't overly hot.
Got it. Okay. Let's take a break here and hear from a sponsor. This episode of Amateur Traveler is sponsored by Skylight Frame. I'm pleased to have Skylight Frame back as a sponsor. You may remember they've sponsored the show before, and when they did, Chris, who's one of the patrons of the show, bought one, and he bought one for his mom. Can you tell that Chris is from the UK? And says, I love the frame, and if I had money, I would happily buy one for my dad again, too. And so if you're thinking of getting something for your mom for Mother's Day, this might be an idea for you. It's a smart frame with a touch interface that you can email photos to and very easily set up. Setup takes something like 60 seconds for your Wi-Fi. I didn't time it exactly, but it's very quick. We put it at my mom so she get pictures of her grandchildren and her one great-granddaughter. Anybody in the family who knows how to take a picture and send an email can send her an update for that frame. It comes with a 100% satisfaction guarantee, so if you don't like it, I'm not sure why you wouldn't. You can get a full refund. And now as a special offer, you can get $10 off your purchase of a Skylight frame when you go to skylightframe.com and enter the code TRAVELER. That's right. To get $10 off your purchase of a Skylight frame, just go to skylightframe.com and enter code TRAVELER. That's SKYLIGHTFRAME.com. Promo code TRAVELER. And thanks to Skylight Frame for sponsoring this episode of The Amateur Traveler.
So you're getting down to Banjul, and a lot of people stay in my Airbnb. Was kind of near an area called Senegambia, which is where a lot of the foreigners visit. And it seemed like they were mostly Europeans that had it on the radar. And it was kind of a little region there, which is close to the beach that I think most of the hotels would be, that people would stay at, where you're walking distance to a couple of the main parts, which is the Monkey Park. And then they have a beach called Kotu, Kotu beach, and kind of a series of beaches that you can walk, and it's beautiful. It's really a beautiful region just below the city. I would recommend staying in that region. Plenty of banks, plenty of restaurants, bars, night areas. The beach is right there, so that's kind of the ideal place to stay in Senegambia.
Well, and I'm always puzzled and intrigued by countries like this that are inside of other countries, because there's obviously an interesting story and history that goes along with that. Can you tell that you're in one versus the other? Do they have significantly different culture, language?
I'd say that English is more spoken in the Gambia,
Okay.
and it's kind of the lingua franca. And French is the lingua franca of Senegal, although most people speak Wolof. So my just survival French seemed like it connected with some people in the Gambia. And I mean, some people in Senegal. And then when I got to the Gambia, my host, for example, spoke really good English, and English was much more widely spoken. So I think that would make the American visitor, the English-speaking visitor, feel more comfortable even in the Gambia compared to Senegal, where French is going to be what most people are going to try to speak with you.
Well, and if people who are from the U.S. have read Alex Haley's classic book Roots about the history of his family, they were from the Gambia River, and the Gambia country basically is the Gambia River Basin. And so he was talking about this area, obviously, some time ago.
That's another thing you notice is that the Gambia is not very many people there. There's only 2 million people in the whole country. Just a little bite-sized country there inside of Senegal. And even a lot of the people that I met there, they were either Europeans or they were from Senegal down for a day trip. It's got such a huge influence being inside of another country, like Lesotho or Swaziland might come to mind, that South Africa is kind of such a big presence that's all around them.
Except Swaziland is now Eswatini.
Eswatini,
to make sure that people don't think they're listening to an old episode. So
it's hard saying Eswatini when you're so used to saying Swaziland.
Yes, well, sometimes they change.
It's a comfortable place. I was surprised at how many Europeans were there actually in this region, not really having heard of anything about it from the U.S. And I'd say that in a couple of days, you can get a nice feel for it.
Bon chien. Bonjour, je suis Theo, a tour leader with Explore. And this is Punti. He's helping us find truffles under the trees next to this beautiful vineyard. Maybe for tomorrow's cooking class? Oui, call Semillon heure. Parfait. Semillon o'clock. Not everyone gets to enjoy a Bordeaux sunset this way, but you will if you explore. No, Punti. Search exploreworldwide.com and don't just travel. Explore.
I got up early to go over to the monkey park, they call it. The official name is Bijulu National Park, and that is a short walk or a taxi drive away from Senegambia. And you could spend several hours over there. There's all kinds of monkeys that are climbing right on the branches near you, and sometimes they could climb on you if you're close to them or if you have bananas and things. And I went over there early in the morning, and lots of families and kids that made their way in around 9 or 10 o'clock that were enjoying the monkey park. And you can connect that with the beaches, which literally you can walk out the backside of the park and walk onto the beach, which is kind of a neat juxtaposition between the two there. So those are a couple of things that you could take half of a day doing, I would say. And then when you work your way up towards kind of more the heart of Banjul, the city, then you could work your way towards the crocodile pool. The name is Kachikali Crocodile Pool, where they've got all kinds of crocodiles there in an African museum, explaining about some of the history of the Gambia. You mentioned markets. I always love markets. So there's the Serekunda Market and the Albert Market, where you can walk around and get a good feel for life. And the markets, I always ask where they are and how to go to them, because for me that's the hub of every city, and especially in West Africa. I feel like street markets with the vendors and the fruits and the clothing and the music, that's where you feel like you're in the heartbeat of the city.
Well, and what kind of things am I finding in the market? Am I finding crafts from the indigenous people of China, or am I finding local crafts, or is it targeted as tourists, or is it targeted as locals, I guess is part of the question?
More locals.
Okay.
I don't think there's enough tourism in these countries that really drive a lot of handicrafts or tourist stalls that are made necessarily strictly for tourists. I think they're more local markets, which you can walk through. I like that. It's a little more of an authentic feel at times, rather than just catering towards souvenirs with the country written on them or something. And so I think it's
Sure.
a little bit more of a local feel, I'd say. But the markets are always fun. And I think during my 7 months in Africa last year, that just getting fruit during the day when it's hot, with a whole pineapple or a coconut, and getting them to cut it up for you, I think I had a lot of fresh fruit along the way in these markets is something they're always selling.
Okay. Now, it's funny because you were 7 months in Africa, and that seems like a long time, but there are 50, how many countries in Africa?
54 countries.
54 countries.
Been there a few times before, but it's
Yeah.
it's a massive continent. I mean, I got into Libya and Algeria several months ago for the last two countries, and the diversity between the different regions. Sometimes we say I go to Africa like it's a whole country.
Right,
But
right.
the diversity is just enormous in the whole continent.
And I didn't really I've seen the maps of here's all the United States and Europe and China and such all laid out
Inside
on the map
of
of
Africa,
Africa, so you
right.
see how big it is. But it wasn't until I was in Cape Town, or no, I guess I was in Johannesburg, and I was flying home to the U.S., and I flew the first 10, 12 hours and was still only in Dakar. And so like, because Dakar is like halfway up.
Yeah, there's still a lot.
There's still a lot of Africa north of that.
All
yeah.
of Mauritania, the Western Sahara region, Morocco, all the way up.
And so that just put it in perspective that I'd flown a long way and I was still in Africa. So it's a
The
big
continent
place.
is an immense place. I was listening to your Virunga podcast the other day, and I think you mentioned that the DRC is 3 times the size of Texas, I want to say.
Right, yeah.
Maybe it was 2 times, but that's massive. And it's just the centerpiece of the whole continent. I think it's 3 times the size of Texas.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Now, did you get a chance, I know you were doing a lot on this trip, to get upriver?
I did not. I would say if you were there for a couple more days, that was one of the things that they recommended to do, that there's different nature reserves that you could see that are upriver in the Gambia. Given that 8-9 day window for things to do, if I had a couple more days, I would have enjoyed going upriver, because that would be the obvious way. When you look at the map of the Gambia with how much water there is,
Sure.
to go somewhere upriver would have been nice.
Well, and did you get a chance to look into what you would do there? Would you take a ferry up, or would you take a tour, or?
There was a guy at the monkey park that was offering me a tour that was going to go in a Jeep to, I want to say it was a nature reserve that was upriver, that wasn't going to be on the water, but it was going to be via his Jeep for kind of a full day excursion. And kind of knowing the time schedule that I had, and that I had to combine the two countries, I had to tell him, well, I'll be staying around Banjul today, but thank you.
And how expensive would a tour like that run you? Do you know?
For the day, I want to say it was about $130 or $140 he was asking me for the day.
Not inexpensive tourist prices.
Yeah, not inexpensive. I think tours in Africa can also often be expensive, and often when they include animals or to their 2 nature reserves or game reserves. So it's always that
Right.
balance.
Well, the game reserves often have an entrance fee that helps support that pretty wonderful mission that they're doing.
Yes.
And one of the ways they support that is with the tourist dollars, which is smart and thoughtful, but yeah, it's not cheap usually because of that.
Especially for foreigners.
Especially for foreigners, yes. There's a local price.
Often there's a price
It's
for
true.
Kenyans or a price for Tanzanians or South Africans, and then there's the non-local price.
I never begrudge them that, but yes. Excellent. Anything else we want to recommend in the Gambia?
I would say from my experience, 2 or 3 days there in the capital, near the capital, going to the monkey park, the markets, the crocodile farm, the African museum, the beaches, and Senegambia is a nice place to wind down. West Africa is really adventurous if you're tying this in with any other countries in West Africa. Senegal and the Gambia is an easier place to ease into, and a place that I think you'd feel comfortable and can spend a day or 2 on the beach and not feel like you're in any kind of danger zone. Very safe feel. So that's what I saw, and that's what I would recommend if you had 2 or 3 days there.
So this is kind of a 10-day-ish itinerary. If you had a couple
Yes.
more days, you said you'd go up the Gambia and do a little more exploring there. If I had another week, what would you add on?
In Senegal, you can go out and do a desert camping experience, which I know my friend who I talked to last night, the French teacher at my high school here in Sacramento, went out to Lom Paul, where they have desert camps where you can ride camels.
So that would be in northern Senegal, I assume, because northern Senegal is where the desert is coming in.
Yeah, in Senegal, and you can have your own private bathroom and gourmet meals in the tent, and music and traditional dancing around a bonfire.
Okay.
And she said that was something that she really enjoyed. So I'd say you could add that on if you were going for a couple more days in Senegal as well.
Excellent. Yeah, there's going to be a little shorter episode. We're not talking about huge countries here. Are we ready to get to some of our wrap-up questions?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, one of the questions I brush off here every once in a while, and West Africa seems like a good time to do it, is when did you feel most at home, most like Sacramento where you live, or when did you feel most foreign?
I'd say with my hosts, I think where you're staying is, for me, it's always key. And I look for good reviews on Airbnb, and that I was with a local gentleman that spoke some English in Dakar, and a really nice lady and her family in Senegambia as a solo independent traveler that was on the road for 14 months last year. That's what makes me feel at home. I love that contact with families and with locals that are looking out for your best interests and basically tell you how to spend your next few days there.
Excellent. Now, Brian, I am a little concerned that you're a school teacher and you were on the road for 14 months last year.
Sure.
Because I feel like that math may not work. So math is
Sure.
not the subject you teach. You teach foreign languages. I
teach Spanish, yes. And I asked for a leave of absence last year. So yes, the 14 months is not normal, but I was able to take a year off.
And that might have
saved and
spanned a little more time than a whole year, like maybe a couple extra months.
2 summers. 2
2
summers in a year.
There we go.
So only 1 school year of teaching.
Got it.
But yes, 2 full summers. So that added up to 14 months.
And then if I expanded that to say, well, actually, you didn't answer the other half of the question. When did it feel most foreign?
I think the long transportation days, sometimes you can feel a little bit at edge because there's hundreds of other people taking the ferry that have done it every day, for example, from Banjul getting across to the northern part of the Gambia. And I'm used to putting in it on patient mode and go with the flow mode. But for someone traveling their first time, knowing that it might take 6 hours, might take 8 or 10 hours, given the stops or the road conditions or the ferry timetable, compared to the rest of West Africa, it really was not bad. So I wouldn't stress that it's something overly difficult. But those transportation days when you're on public transportation, people that are accustomed to taking tours or private cars need to be a little bit flexible for that.
Excellent. And if we expanded the question to say West Africa, most at home and most foreign?
Well, I'll start with most foreign because that one jumps out to me a little bit more right off the bat. The overall patience and extreme dedication that you need to work your way through this region, getting visas and public transportation are massive.
More so for any particular countries?
Oof. So let's say Nigeria is a difficult one to get the visa for. Cameroon took me a little while. Angola
is one of the ones I've definitely heard of.
Yeah, Angola's gotten easier, but it's still not that easy.
Yeah.
Central African Republic's more Central Africa, but flying in there, they canceled our flight because there's no lights at the entire airport in Bangui. And so they had to put us on the flight the next morning because there's no electricity basically at the whole airport. So
that is kind of an Africa experience sometimes.
There's a lot of adventure. West Africa is maybe the most adventurous region in the world when you look at how many visas you need to get, how you're going to connect these countries, and the time it takes, even in the dry season, to do so. What made me feel the most at home in these countries? The local people that you meet, I mean, you feel like you're on the outside until you meet people who are there. And even if I'm in Chad or Niger or Mali, like in Mali, for example, I'll throw in a case. I was up in the center part in Djenné, where they have this big mud mosque that's one of the symbols of West Africa. And as soon as I got into town...
So not Timbuktu, but similar.
Not Timbuktu, but similar. Timbuktu was a no-go zone when I was there last year.
Unfortunately.
And Djenné and Mopti was kind of the fringe of where you were safe to go to, according to the contacts I had. And so as soon as I got into town, I met a local man, and he offered to take me around for the next couple of days for a very reasonable rate, had me over, had meals with his family, showed me all around, and I was the only foreigner for 48 hours that I saw in Djenné at some of the most incredible mud mosques I had ever seen. The symbol of Mali, and one of the symbols of West Africa. That kind of thing makes me feel at home.
Excellent. Getting back to Senegal and the Gambia, you're standing in the prettiest spot you saw. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
In the Gambia, I'd say the monkey park that flows right down to the beach, that literally you're seeing all these monkeys hopping around the branches and eating bananas out of your hand. You walk out and you're on a kind of white sand, just beautiful beach that is 100 yards outside of the monkey park. That was a cool morning for me. In Senegal, I would say those kind of typical colored fishing boats that are lined up with all the guys hauling them up on the shore, and the Divinity Mosque is a big one there. It's right there with the call to prayer, which
beach.
It's right there on the beach. Yeah, literally, it's like right on the shore of the beach, and one of the moments that all over the Muslim world, but that early morning call to prayer that wakes you up at 5:30 in the morning that you become accustomed to, and then you go back to sleep. But that early morning wake up call is something that sticks in my mind. One of my friends in Morocco owns a guest house, and his deal was that he told the mosque next door he'd buy them new speakers because the speakers were wearing out as long as he faced the speakers in the opposite direction from his guest house. So I love that story. He's had a guest house in Ouarzazate, Morocco, for about 8 years, and says that life got much better for his guests once they faced the speakers in the opposite direction.
I don't know, that first night in a Muslim country, you know that you're not in Kansas anymore when you wake up at the pre-dawn hours, depending on what time of year you're there. So. One last bonus question. One thing that you should remember to pack before you go to Senegal or the Gambia?
I'll say the yellow fever vaccination is something which I felt like in every single country in Africa last year, I had to pull that out on arrival and
pull
show
out
that
your yellow vaccination record paperwork.
Yellow fever card.
Yeah. Oh, the yellow fever card. Okay.
The yellow fever card. So I had that, and that was literally inside of my passport for every country in West Africa.
Got it.
And they would have someone physically checking for that everywhere that you go. And I assume the Gambia and the Senegal is going to be the case, whether you're going by land or by plane, to make sure you have that ready to go.
Excellent. Yeah, I mentioned that I spent an hour or two on the plane in Dakar. What I didn't mention was it was a night flight at this point in a foggy night, and they came on board and were fumigating the plane. It's just a very surreal experience. It's just, the whole thing felt like, okay, I don't know where we are right now.
Oh, and I'll mention one other thing too, is that Dakar is a nice hub. You mentioned that you went through there.
Yeah.
If you're going to go to a place like Cape Verde, which is a really cool country to visit, there's flights that go out of Dakar, and it's straight off the coast there. A lot of Europeans go to Cape Verde. There's several islands to go to. I really enjoyed my time there. So you could use it as a hub as well if you're visiting other countries in the region. It's one of the main spots to jump out of from West Africa.
Very good. Excellent. And if you had to summarize Senegal and the Gambia in just 3 words, or 3 words each, if you prefer, what 3 words would you use?
Perfect place to start in Africa.
2 countries, 4 words. I'll give you that.
Perfect introduction. Safe, friendly, varied.
That was way more than 3 words, but that's okay.
Sorry.
And then our guest again is Brian Asher from theworldhiker.com. And Brian, if we wanted to send people to theworldhiker.com, to the best post you have on Senegal and the Gambia, where should we send them?
So I have travel itineraries, Africa. I will be adding when I have Comoros. So travel itineraries, Africa, Instagram. I do a lot of pictures on Instagram as well from all the different countries, from 195 different countries. So that's a good spot to get a feel for what these things are like. And also videos on YouTube at The World Hiker.
Excellent. And Brian, thanks so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for Africa, for West Africa, and then specifically for Senegal and the Gambia.
Sure. And I want to thank you, because this is one of the podcasts that I have on those long transportation days when you're in Africa, and when you can tune out and feel like you're not completely alone and have some travel put into your ears on an interesting topic. It is really helpful.
In news of the community, I do have to share something that made me laugh. There have been a number of people who have written here in the last couple of weeks when we've been in lockdown here in March and April of 2020 about the best travel podcast to listen to while you're in quarantine and things like that. And it's nice to see Amateur Traveler get included, as it has been a number of times, but it caught me a little bit by surprise when my tools picked up a reference from a new article that was titled Die besten Podcasts zum Thema Reisen, which is written in German and apparently is the best travel podcast. I'm just a little surprised because the entire article is in German and Amateur Traveler is not. So if you're a German and English speaker and have recently joined the show because you saw it written about, welcome. Thanks again to patrons of the show who are supporting it. As I read a message from Chris Kilworth last week, I mentioned that he had a podcast. I found the name of his podcast. It's Between the Mountains. And so if you're looking for a podcast about mountains and mountain climbing, Between the Mountains is done by Chris, who is a patron of the show. And thanks to all our patrons for supporting us. I had an encouraging letter from David recently that said, I've been meaning to email you. I'm a longtime listener and have used your podcasts to map out a lot of itineraries over the past few years. My wife and I went on safari in September 2018 and flew into Mount Kilimanjaro. The last podcast reminded me to write you. It is a tough time in the travel world and will probably continue to be so for a while. Your podcasts have been a mainstay in my life for going on 3 years, even though it may be some time before we are traveling again. I want to encourage you to continue to make great content. Your podcasts provide a mental break in uncertain times. And thanks, Dave. And with that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.